Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. Today we're going to be looking at a very impactful deck from the Team Up expansion. I think this has huge potential. It's been tearing up tournaments in Japan, and it's definitely going to be a top contender when it comes out in our English sets. So let's talk about Pikachu&Zekrom. Its attack's really a bonkers. It's an expensive attacker, but the stuff that it does is ridiculous damage output and the potential to take 4 prizes in one turn with its GX attack. Yes, it's a lot of energy cards, but we do have some great non-GX attackers that can be putting on early pressure in the game, taking prizes here and there, whilst also setting up energies onto our board so that we can get them all onto the Pikachu&Zekrom. That is the idea with this deck. So let's start off with the Pokemon. We have 2 copies of Raikou from Shining Legends. This Booming Thunder attack is actually pretty dangerous when you put it in a build like this. It does 30 for 1 lightning, and you get to attach an energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. Obviously, we want lots of energies on the field because we want to be using Tapu Koko GX later, as well as Pikachu&Zekrom Tag Team GX. So this energy acceleration is going to be really nice. We have a lot of ways of discarding energy cards, getting them into the discard early, and we're going to be looking to do that so that we can get this energy acceleration. This 30 damage is deceptively powerful as well. Obviously, it is a lightning type himself, so with 1 Electropower, you can be knocking out opposing Zapdos players, which is really good. And you can be knocking out like 60 hit point basics with just 1 Electropower as well. So this is actually dangerous in this format. When you're playing a list that has 4 Electropowers, he's probably taking early prizes in most matchups. So he's a really good lead for the deck, and he's a very strong attacker with a lot of good synergy here. Then we have this Pikachu&Zekrom Tag Team GX Pokemon. 240 hit points. It does have a weakness to fighting, which is a bit of a headache, especially because a Baby Buzzwole can do 1 attachment to knock it out on the critical Sledgehammer turn. So that is a concern for sure. We have to try and be very careful when we put the Zekrom into play, because of course he does give up 3 prize cards. But in matchups where he's not going to get slaughtered, he is going to be the one taking lots of prizes on his own back. For 3 lightning energy, you get to do 150, and you get to search your deck for 3 lightning energy and attach them to one of your Pokemon. That's absolutely absurd. You can even attach it to himself. So that's the idea here. You get yourself to 3 energy cards in a matchup where the Zekrom won't be knocked out in 1 hit. Then you use that first attack, most likely taking 2 prizes in the process because it does 150. We have choice bands, we have Electropowers. That's oftentimes going to be just hitting the active really hard. And then we put 3 more energies on top of him. If your opponent can't hit 240 that turn, you get to use his GX attack, which is usually going to be into a handshake for game, because you get to do 200 damage to the active. If you have 3 extra energy cards attached to the Pikachu, you also get to do 170 damage snipe to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. That's looking straight at Tapu Lele, saying, those are my 2 prizes, and you're slamming the active as well. So this is absolutely absurd. In any deck that can't respond on a Zekrom Pikachu, it can get ridiculous value. Even in non-GX matchups, to be honest, if you're taking just 2 prizes and jumping over some stuff, because we already have Zapdos and Raikou that are already very good at racing, and the Zekrom probably isn't going to get responded for a couple turns just because of how beefy he is, it gets insane value. So I think this guy is really, really good, especially in matches where, you know, people can't hit that 240, which, let's be honest, is quite difficult when they're not hitting for weakness. So that's really awesome. Very, very strong attacker. If the Pikachu&Zekrom route isn't the one we can go for in these other matchups, we do have 2 Tapu Koko GXs. It has the Aero Trail. It obviously doesn't have weakness to fighting, which is really nice. So again, we have these Raikous in here. We have the Koko Prism for energy acceleration. It's quite easy to get this Tapu Koko GX into the active using Sky High Claws with the damage buffs of Electropowers and Choice Bands. This also does big numbers. And the Tapu Thunder GX attack, obviously very good for mirror matches. If someone else is trying to get their Zekrom out against you, that's going to be huge. Great against Gardevoir, great against a handful of other decks that aren't going to be committing lots of energy to the field. This GX attack is also one that we have to look out for. Zeraora GX has that Thunderclap Zone ability, which is really nice for a deck like this because everything otherwise has very chunky retreat costs. So reducing that to 0 is going to be insane. We also have the Plasma Fists attack that does 160 and it can't attack next turn. Again, I'll always keep talking about Choice Band and Electropower because we have such high counts and Volkner in the deck to try and reach these one-shots. So Plasma Fists as well is also a very big attack that we can go for. The full voltage GX attack means that in, again, matchups where the Pikachu&Zekrom is not going to work, we can get even more energies onto the field to support sort of an aero trail bouncing kind of loop and using Plasma Fist and stuff like that. It also protects us quite nicely against mill matchups because we can get so many energies onto the board all at once and they can only remove, you know, like 1 or 2 a turn in general most of the time, so that's going to be pretty good for you. Then we're going to have 2 copies of Zapdos. It has weakness to lightning and resistance to fighting, so this is again some help in terms of type coverage to make the matchup a little bit closer. So we're hoping in fighting matchups to be using mainly Zapdos and Tapu Koko GX, maybe some Raikou in there as well in the early turns. That's really what we're trying to hope to do, and save Zeraora or Zekrom for only exactly if we can burst them out in 1 turn and get 1 shot. So that's pretty much it. But the Zapdos is amazing again for early pressure. You can just do that 10 and 70 more if you jump into the active that turn. Obviously, we have free retreat with our Zeraora GX, so it's quite easy for us to move into our Zapdos and back out again and take some early prizes, maybe some early Guzma knockouts on some key targets like Dittos and Grimers and stuff like that, because this deck is quite focused on its basic abilities. As you can see, the Zeraora, both Kokos and Lele, all abilities. Our deck is all basics. We don't really want to see a muck in most situations. So Zapdos taking those out is going to be really nice for us. Obviously, initiating prize race as well is going to be fantastic. So again, a really good attacker that we have here. And it allows us to have a lot of non-GXs that we can represent on the board. 2 Raikous, 2 Zapdos, and a stretcher that I'm playing. You're hoping in other non-GX matchups that we can still be having a lot of them to represent threats and keep up in those sorts of games. Onto the items, just mentioned Rescue Stretcher. I think I predominantly like it in here for some help against other non-GX decks, but also it helps out if we have to Acro Bike certain things away, or if we have awkward prizes, because we play a lot of 2 copies of every one of our sort of attackers, and they're all usable and really important in certain matchups. So I like having a stretcher to recover a piece that's very important in a specific matchup. 1 copy of Energy Switch. It may look kind of niche and difficult to get the use out of, but we do play Volkner in here, so I think it's worth playing this copy to, again, get some sneaky ways of getting attacks in on certain turns. A couple copies of Nest Ball. I think lots of Pokemon Search is really nice in this deck. We want to have the option to get early Zapdos and Raikous. We want to get Koko Prism Star down, as well as having other bench Pokemon to use him as quickly as possible, so I think the Nest Balls are great. 3 copies of Acro Bike can help us start getting rid of some lightning energy cards, whilst also motoring through the deck a little bit more. 4 copies of Ultra Ball, again, for some nice discards, and also gets us rolling in general. 4 copies of Electropower, the huge damage buff that we get from this guy means that we reach knockouts all the time, as well as these 3 Choice Band to help us reach perfect numbers as well. I'm playing 1 copy of the Viridian Forest Stadium card from the new set. It allows you to discard any card from your hand, and you get to go ahead and search out a basic energy card and put it into your hand. I think this is nice. The deck always wants to see lots of energy, and a lot of the time we can use Viridian Forest on an energy, so we go 1 to the discard, 1 to the hand. We basically don't lose anything, but we get to gain an energy into the discard pile to help combo with the Tapu Koko Prism Star and with the Zeraora GX attack and the Raikou and stuff like that. So I do really like the Viridian Forest. I think it's slightly better than Aether Paradise. The Aether Paradise helps us tank a little bit more if we're going down the Tapu Koko sort of jump around route. But I'm only playing 1 Acerola in this build anyway, because I like having more speed to try and get the Zekrom out in the first place. So I think it's kind of niche, and the Viridian Forest seems better overall to me. To be honest, I'd like to see another copy in this deck, because I think it's so good for helping us reach our combo. And I like having counter stadiums in this meta because of all these annoying Prism Style Stadium cards like Black Market and Wonder Lab and stuff like that. So this is a nice stadium bounce, and I could think about squeezing in a second one as well, to be honest. I think the card is so strong. 1 copy of Thunder Mountain Prism Star. This is, again, just the cream of the crop for us. We reduce our attack costs by 1 lightning, which is just really insane to get these big attacks going. So whenever you have this, you're really happy to see it. And then onto the supporters. We are going to play that 1 Lisia. That helps us see that Thunder Mountain as early as possible, and it means we can pull out our Tapu Koko Prism Star. So it's like we're being able to accelerate 3 energies just from 1 Lisia, which is really strong. And because there are mucks roaming around, you want to try and rush that Koko Prism as quickly as possible to try and get the value before it gets shut off from you. 1 copy of Acerola. I think that the deck is so aggressive that you don't need to bounce too much, but when you have a 240 hit point Pokemon, it just makes sense that you can get an Acerola value. And when we have a couple Leles anyway, I feel like it's worth playing the 1 copy. 2 copies of Lillie to support some early game draws, really to flesh out the supporters for the deck for some consistency. 3 Volkner, I think it's nice pulling out energy cards, pulling out some specific items as well. Early game search cards, mid game sort of like Electropowers for reaching numbers. I think all of that's really nice. 4 copies of Guzma. I think the deck is still trying to use Zapdos in those early turns to take those early prizes, and we can race quite effectively. I think you shouldn't get tunnel visioned on just trying to get the GX attack off with your Pikachu&Zekrom to close the game. I think the deck can oftentimes just race with a couple Zapdos attacks early, and then 2 big GX knockouts with, you know, sometimes the Pikachu&Zekrom, sometimes Zeraora, sometimes Koko. The deck is so flexible, especially because you have that early pressure from the Raikous and the Zapdos. These Guzmas really do come in trumps against those, so that's really, really strong. And of course, it means that we can also make sure that a Snipe gets a big knockout. Even if we're not getting it on a Lele, we could do like a Zapdos or a Raikou hit to put something in range for you, and then Guzma, and then you're again taking 3 or 4 prizes all at once. So I think it's very, very strong in combination with Zapdos specifically, but also for that late game, you can pick off some GXs. And 4 copies of Cynthia for, again, just the good old consistency. Now, I mean, I have seen some Erica's Hospitality going into the Japanese builds. I'm still trusting in Cynthia just for that early game. I'm someone who always likes to get set up early rather than have the Erica for sort of like mid to late game where it's potentially stronger to get multiple combo pieces all at once, rather than maybe we would have to like commit an Electropower, then play Cynthia, and then we'd have a feels bad or feels good moment if we hit the next combination card that we need, like a second power or a second choice band or something like that. Whereas Erica can sort of like let you build a hand a bit better. But I'm more concerned about early game consistency, and that's why I'm playing the 4 copies. But if you want to weave in some Erica's Hospitality, I think the card is proving itself to be very strong from what I can see from Japanese lists so far. So I could definitely see reducing that count to weave in a couple Erica. Onto the energy, 12 Lightning. Pretty simple, giving us lots of options to see them early, always have attachments, and have plenty, you know, that we can even grab with Volkner, grab from the deck with our Pikachu&Zekrom, and have even more excess in the hand so we can discard them for our Raikou and our Koko Prism Star. So here is the full list, 13 Pokemon, 34 of all the other good stuff, and 12 Lightning Energy. I think for me right now, the card that I'm really trying to wiggle in is a second Viridian Forest. I think it's really valuable in this deck for some extra discards, and pulling out even more energy cards is great. I think I've undervalued this card. I think it's really good in this deck, and I'd like to see it be a 2 count, to be honest. Maybe cutting an Acro Bike, but maybe not. Onto the tech options. I think the deck is actually way tighter than I first thought, and I tried to play around with some cool stuff. I was thinking originally that I would want a Jolteon GX in here, doing those 30-30s early, similar to Raikou. If you're getting Electropowers, you're probably taking early prizes, and you're setting up other things on the bench. So even like a Zoroark then gets in range of like some snipes, stuff like that is kind of what I was looking for. But I think it just wasn't quite... There just isn't enough space, I think, in this deck, to be honest. It's too tight, and I want to make the combo as reliable as possible, so I don't want to fit in the Jolteon. Similar reason why I'm not playing the Absol. I want to make the combo as reliable as possible. So although you could use this card to slow down Zapdos mirror matches, which if they're playing a more non-GX build is definitely an awkward matchup for you, I don't think it's that valuable. And this deck is actually kind of tight on bench space sometimes. I thought about having a Giratina in here. In my initial build, I had 1 copy of Giratina just so that you could use Distortion Door, and then your Pikachu&Zekrom could hit 180 on something like Blacephalons and a Dawnwings or a Necrozma GX, stuff like that. I was thinking, wow, this is absolutely busted. It would be awesome. But you don't need to use the Pikachu&Zekrom GX attack in some of those matchups, and actually against things like Blacephalon, you can't really afford to get your Pikachu&Zekrom out because they're probably going to blow it up quite easily. So after thinking the math was amazing for fixing, which it is, it doesn't actually... Like, we don't even go down that route in the matchup that we were trying to tech it in for, because it's too risky to get your Pikachu&Zekrom out, and it's way better for you to just be doing early Zapdos pressure into 2 GX knockouts with, like, Koko and Zeraora and stuff. So, ended up cutting the Giratina. I thought it was really cute, though, and if you want to do some hilarious ways to get, like, sneaky win cons against stuff that have 180 hit points. The Distortion Door into the 170 damage snipe could be hilarious. Aether Paradise Conservation Area was a stadium that I've seen in a few builds. I really don't like it. I think it sort of leads you down a path of like trying to tank and make the game go long. And this deck doesn't want to go long. It wants to be very quick and sort of win in 4 or 5 attacks. And this doesn't really suit the deck. I would much prefer to thin the deck out with Viridian Forest in most situations. I think if you wanted to play a double stadium, you could go to like second Acerola and have that sort of direction. But I don't really like that sort of idea. And also it means you don't have a counter stadium against a Venusaur, which also kind of sucks. I'm currently playing no hand disruption, so working in a Let Loose or a Judge could definitely be something you look for as well, just to try and slow down some of these other clunkier builds that are out there that could be awkward for you. And then I was thinking, because we're already playing Lisia, you could try weaving in a Ditto Prism Star and then just having sort of one stage 1 draw engine to fall back on, just in case mucks do hit the field, stuff like that. I think it could definitely be reasonable. I like Smooth Over in combination with the 3 Acro Bikes that we have. I think we already have enough discard that we don't need the Zeb Striker in the deck, but both are worth considering just to have, again, a bit of protection against muck, which is, you know, always going to be a bit of a headache for you when we're so reliant on basic abilities in this deck. So on to the matchup overview. I've put Zora Rock as potentially an awkward one, especially if they play things like Weavile, because we do have a lot of abilities that we normally need to put onto our board. We're normally reliant on getting that Zeraora into play. We're going to have things like Lele on the board early, most likely. So I think specifically it's awkward if they have Weavile in there. And if it's a thick Weavile, it gets even more awkward. I think Zoroark Stage 1 is typically going to go towards that Weavile route because of the things like Nanu, Dangerous Drill, and also the Black Market Prism Star. So I'm assuming that Zoroark decks are playing Weavile, and that's going to be a bit of a problem. You can't go for the Pikachu&Zekrom in a Zora Rock matchup unless they don't get any Rockruffs down, because they can just Gust and GX you, which would really suck. Even with counter gain, they can do that as well, so that's just too scary for you. You have to try and go for the early Zapdos pressure route into your GXs for big smack knockouts, and hope that they don't have enough Weaviles, or hope that you can somehow be consistent enough without the need for putting down Lele's and stuff, and not putting down too many ability-based Pokemon for you. I think Gramble will also be rough. Again, we have the early pressure of Zapdos and Raikou, but we need to still put GXs onto the board. They're very good at trading and keeping up. It's really down to you as the Pikachu&Zekrom player to try and use the Zapdos to knock out Magcargos, disrupt their engine. That forces us to have like Guzmas and Electropowers, and unlike the pure Zapdos deck, we don't have Jirachi to help us get those pieces all at once. So it's a little bit difficult, and it forces us to put GXs onto the board just to continue with Prize Race, and that plays nicely into Gramble's hands, which is a little bit bad. Buzzrock is obviously going to be awkward as well. We have the Zapdos to try and make it close, and we have Tapu Koko to try and make it close, but I still think they have enough one-hit KO potential in their deck and early pressure on their own end that it will be very difficult for us. Lost March, I think, will be kind of difficult as well. Their damage output can get very high, and they can keep up in a non-GX kind of race. Passimian Koko I'm foreseeing as the worst matchup for this deck. Almost everything is horrible to put onto the board. I think you have to try and just use Tapu Koko GX as much as possible to take sort of 2-for-2 trades and hope that you can get like some early Zapdos in there to try and, you know, win out a race, but I think it'll be very awkward for you. Aerodactyl I've put as awkward as well. I think as much as we have the sort of early pressure of Zapdos, I keep saying how important that is. It's still a Zapdos deck really a lot of the time. And the Pikachu&Zekrom sort of comes later, or in matchups where he's useless, he doesn't. But again, I feel like with just 2 copies and with having to put Zeraora into play, it can just play into the hands of an Aerodactyl deck a little bit too much. And then a Zapdos Jirachi, I think, is also unfavored. I think they have their own Koko GX. If ever you're flooding the board with too many energy cards, they're going to be more efficient at pulling out these pieces thanks to their Jirachi engine. And they can also be playing things like Nihilego and Baby Buzz to take big one-shots on top of, you know, everything else that they play in the deck. Even things like Zeb Striker can take one-shots. So I think that is equally awkward. So I think you're a little bit weak in the Zapdos mirror match, and that's a slight concern for this deck. But I think this has a lot more stopping power than the Shrine build, so I can definitely foresee people still going down this route. My closing thoughts are that it is really, really easy to get 3 energy onto Pikachu&Zekrom. It's just if you want to. And that's what you need to start learning when you're playtesting this deck. How many matchups can you afford to get the big daddy into play, getting those 4 prize swings? Because as soon as you do, you'll just dominate the game. But there are games where you can't go for that, and you need to be more conservative. In the games where you don't need Pikachu&Zekrom, your focus is getting early Zapdos pressure, and then moving into Tapu Koko GX and Zeraora in the mid to late game to take those last 4 prizes over like 2 turns. To be honest, I still think that win condition is still very strong. I mean, I've tested a lot of Zapdos, mainly with Jirachi, but the deck having Zeraora anyway for like retreating around the board is going to make it quite easy for you to chain Zapdos attacks in the early turns alongside Guzma's. So I think it's still, you know, pretty easy for you to take 2 prizes with Zapdos and then move into, you know, Koko Prism Star blows himself up, and then Koko GX comes into the active, and that's when we switch the playstyle into, okay, now it's time to just dig for choice bands and Electropowers. I think it won't be that difficult for you. And yeah, the final note is that the tag team GX attack, as insane as it is, don't go down the rabbit hole trying to chase it every single game, because there are some matchups where it's just a bad idea to commit a 3 prize Pokemon to your board when it's not going to be safe. I think the likes of Gardevoir decks, the likes of Lycanroc and Weavile decks, anything that could be teching Buzzwole, all those things are headaches that you don't really want to put the Pikachu&Zekrom down in. At the end of the day, it's just a 2 count in the deck. It can be the focus in the matchups where it's helpful and when you're not going to get one shot, but when you don't, still just remain calm and go for your different lines. Don't just get the Pikachu&Zekrom out for the sake of it. But yeah, that's my thoughts on the deck. I think it's really powerful, to be honest. I think one of the biggest things keeping it in check is that we have Baby Buzzwole in the format. We have Nihilego in the format. There's a few things that we can do to sort of like one-shot them straight back in like another Zapdos build. So I think that's the biggest headache. And a couple of the non-GX decks that can trade efficiently, like the Grambles and the Lost Marches and the Persimmons. I think those are the things that you've got to be wary of. But otherwise, I think this deck is really, really powerful. Pretty consistent as well, I think, at getting its combo off. And I think it's definitely a threat looking at the new set. So that's all I have for you guys today. Let me know what you think about the list. What other cards would you be playing? How do you think this deck is going to shape up in the format? Is it going to be tier 1 like we've been seeing in the Japanese results? Or is it going to be, you know, countered too heavily for the international championships for it to come out with a win? Let me know down below, and I'll see you tomorrow for another team up deck. Cheers.